Welcome. Take a moment to settle in. Let your shoulders release the tension of the day. Allow the air around you to soften, and let your breath fall into a slower rhythm. Tonight, we will wander far back into the dry, sun-baked lands between two rivers, to a place where the streets were made of clay, where the markets were loud with barter and prayer, where scribes scratched lines into wet tablets, and where the laws of men and of gods shape daily life with exacting hands. You are in ancient Babylon now. Not the Babylon of myths and towers, but the one of blistered feet, crumbling mud brick walls, and bread that was more grit than grain. This journey will unfold in 4 quiet chapters. First, we'll slip into the sandals of an ordinary Babylonian, a worker, a servant, perhaps even a child, and feel the steady weight of sun, toil, and ritual. Then we'll rise into the courts of Hammurabi himself, following the threads of justice and power as they were carved forever into stone. Next, we'll descend beneath the Ziggurat, into layers of forgotten earth, buried offerings, and silent riddles. And finally, we'll walk among the columns of Nebuchadnezzar's palace, where gardens climb toward heaven and omens whisper through incense smoke. So close your eyes if you wish, or simply listen. Let the rhythm of ancient life lull you gently, like the flow of the Euphrates under moonlight. And now, let's begin with the daily life of someone not remembered by history. Someone like you, in a world that feels impossibly distant and yet oddly familiar. Imagine yourself waking before the sun rises, before the dusty blue of morning light even touches the rooftops. You sleep on a reed mat in a single-room home made of sun-dried mud bricks, its walls cracked from years of shifting heat and rare, sudden rains. The air is already warm, close, and dry. There is no bed to make, no private chamber to linger in. Only the press of duty always there, like the heat, like the flies. You live in the workers' quarter, just outside the temple district, close enough to serve, but far from luxury. Your job depends on the season. Perhaps you sweep the courtyards of a temple, or haul clay jars for a merchant, or walk the city walls collecting dung for fuel. The first task of the day is always the same: fetch water. You carry a clay jug balanced awkwardly on your hip, walking through alleys still slick from the night's condensation. The streets of Babylon are not stone, they are packed earth and clay, made treacherous by dust and use. When it rains on those rare, blessed days, it becomes a sticky, dangerous mire. At the well, there's already a line. Women in linen wraps, children with bare feet, an old man with clouded eyes. Everyone waits, quietly. The city is stirring, and already the scent of yeast, dust, and animals fills the air. You breathe in the smell of life and decay. Your breakfast is flatbread coarse, chewy, a little sour. Sometimes you re-lucky, and there's a smear of mashed dates or a few spoonfuls of barley porridge. You eat quickly, crouched in a shaded corner, watching ants march between the bricks. If you work at the temple, and many do, you'll spend hours sweeping, burnishing copper tools, grinding pigment for scribes, or incense for ritual. The priests move past silently, robes whispering, faces unreadable. You do not speak to them unless spoken to. You do not interrupt a prayer. You do not ask questions about the tablets or the idols or the symbols. You are one of the many whose labor oils the gears of devotion. The gods are everywhere. Their names are carved into gates, their statues fed with offerings. They are not kind. They are not cruel. They simply are. By midday, the sun presses down with such insistence that even stone seems to sweat. You wrap your head to keep the heat from swimming into your mind. If you are near the river, you may be sent to ferry bundles or wash linens, work that smells of silt, fish, and the sharp bite of soapwort. Taxes are always a worry. Even if you do not earn coin, your labor is counted, and the collectors come twice a year with tablets and questions. Sometimes people vanish after these visits. Sometimes they return thinner, quieter. There is no privacy. No rest, really only pauses. In the evening, you may return to your family if you're lucky. If you're a woman, your duties continue: cooking, mending, fetching, kneading. If you're a man, perhaps there's a moment to sit, to speak of rumors from the palace, of barley shortages, or strange omens in the sky. The night comes slowly, a gentle darkening of the tan sky to a velvet purple. The stars are bright and steady. You sleep again on your mat to the soft hum of cicadas and distant drums, and the next day is exactly the same. This is Babylon not as a legend, but as a rhythm. Unyielding, dusty, baked in heat and rule and reverence. It is beautiful in its own way, but it is not easy. You would not last a day. Now let us step out of the alleyways and workyards and into the halls of judgment, where walls rise taller, where scribes lean over tablets etched with purpose, and where the breath of law is not merely spoken, it is carved into stone. We turn now to Hammurabi, a name you may know, though the man himself is half lost behind his own legend. He ruled Babylon nearly 4,000 years ago, in the 18th century BCE. At the time, Babylon was not yet the vast empire it would later become. It was a small but growing city-state, one among many in the patchwork of Mesopotamia. Hammurabi was not born to greatness, but he was born to strategy. He came to power during a delicate time. The region was fractured dozens of kingdoms, each with their own gods, dialects, and ambitions. Larsa, Ishnana, Mari, and Assur, each city its own little world, each king its own son. And into this world, Hammurabi stepped with quiet force, not immediately as a conqueror, but as a builder of walls, of alliances, and of systems. It would take many years and many carefully chosen battles before Babylon would rise above its rivals. But perhaps Hammurabi's most enduring legacy was not conquest, but control. Through the written word, imagine a slab of dark basalt stone, standing tall over 7 feet, its surface etched with tiny, ordered lines of Akkadian cuneiform. At the top, a carving, Hammurabi, standing respectfully before the seated god Shamash, the deity of justice. Shamash hands him a rod and a ring, symbols of authority, of measurement, of divine permission. This is the code of Hammurabi, not the first law code in history, but the most famous of its kind. It contained nearly 300 laws, not written for discussion, but for clarity. Concrete, absolute, sometimes harsh, sometimes surprisingly nuanced. The laws covered trade, marriage, theft, debt, agriculture, slavery, and assault. They were specific. They read less like philosophy and more like accounting. If a builder builds a house and it collapses and kills the owner, the builder shall be put to death. If a son strikes his father, his hands shall be cut off. If a man rents an ox and injures it through negligence, he must repay the owner. It may sound brutal, but in Hammurabi's time, this codification was a revelation. A world where justice was often arbitrary, where the whims of rulers or priests determined fates, suddenly found itself tethered to something fixed. A law that everyone, in theory, could know, could expect, could fear. But fairness in Babylon was always entangled with hierarchy. The code was deeply stratified. Punishments changed depending on your status, noble, commoner, or slave. For a nobleman, an eye for an eye. For a slave, sometimes just a fine. The gods, too, were always watching. Many laws invoked the divine. A perjurer might be thrown into the river for judgment. If he survived, he was innocent. If not, well, the river had spoken. Hammurabi positioned himself not merely as a king, but as a shepherd, a caretaker, a conduit of divine order. He wrote in the prologue to his code, "I have not withdrawn myself from the men whom Bel gave to me, the rule over whom Marduk gave to me. I was not negligent, but I made them rest in peace." And yet, When Hammurabi died, his kingdom began to unravel. His successors could not hold the empire together. Babylon fell to invaders. The law code remained, but it was no longer enforced. Centuries later, when scholars unearthed the black stele bearing the code, it had been moved. Taken as a spoil of war, likely by the Elamites, preserved not by its own people, but by those who defeated them. Today, it stands in a museum in Paris, a monument to an ancient king's effort to bring order to chaos, and to his belief that even the divine should be held to account. So, when you think of justice, of rules etched in stone, know that long ago, in the heat and dust of Babylon, a king dared to make fairness physical, even if fairness itself remained unbalanced. From the court to the earth beneath it, let us now descend below the ziggurats into the layers of forgotten offerings, whispers in clay, and the mystery of what lies buried. Now let us move gently downward, away from the king's court, beyond the chatter of scribes and the clang of tools, and into something deeper, older, still breathing with the memory of thousands of years. Imagine yourself standing at the base of a ziggurat, a step pyramid, not smooth and geometric like those of Egypt, but layered, broad, ascending in tiers toward the sky. These structures were the beating heart of Mesopotamian cities, temples to the gods, mountains made by human hands. The Ziggurat of Babylon, known as Etemenanke, which means the foundation of heaven and earth, was said to rise nearly 300 feet. Its top brushed the sky. Its base was sun-baked clay and fired bricks, laid in courses by countless workers whose names were never recorded. You do not walk inside a ziggurat. They are not hollow. They are solid, massive, symbolic. At the summit, a shrine. Only priests ascended, and only at the proper time. But beneath the foundation and around its margins, that is where the real mystery lies. Archaeologists digging under ziggurats and nearby temple complexes have found chambers, small, intentionally buried spaces, sometimes filled with offerings, clay figures, jars sealed with bitumen, ivory combs, carved amulets, copper razors. Sometimes there are tablets, and sometimes bones. These deposits weren't haphazard, they were ritual. Foundations meant to anchor the structure not just to the earth, but to the divine. It was believed that temples had to be ritually fed before they could function. A ceremony known as mouth opening was sometimes performed on statues to give them life, to invite the god within. In some ruins, archaeologists found broken vessels arranged in patterns as if mimicking the stars. In others, signs that fire had been used to purify the ground before the first bricks were laid. There is one tale, half fact, half suggestion, of a small room found beneath a ziggurat platform, sealed so tightly that its contents were untouched for over 3,000 years. Inside, a single finely made lyre, cracked by time, but still strung with gold. And beside it, a cup, a bone stylus, and the impression of a hand in dry clay. What was it for? A dedication? A farewell? Or perhaps a sacrifice of song? The truth is softly held by the soil. Some tablets buried beneath temples speak of the me, a Mesopotamian concept hard to translate, but close to divine order, the building blocks of civilization. Writing, music, kingship, weaving, war, truth. It was believed that these things were not invented, but bestowed, passed down from the gods to humankind. And so, temples weren't just places of worship. They were where the divine and the mundane touched. In Babylon, this touching was not accidental. Every brick was inscribed with the name of the king, every statue placed with direction, and every sealed offering was a whisper, a hope, that the structure would last, that the gods would listen. But time does not always listen. The Ziggurat of Babylon at Etemenanke no longer stands. It crumbled, rebuilt, crumbled again. By the time Alexander the Great arrived, it was in ruins. He ordered it repaired, but died before a single layer could be restored. Today, the foundations remain, and scattered across museums, in Berlin and Baghdad and London, are the quiet pieces once buried beneath it. A child's figurine, a priest's seal, a jar still capped with ancient wax. What remains is not just stone, but intention. So the next time you see a ruin, think of what lies beneath it. Not only bones or gold or names, but the long, patient conversation between humans and the unknown. The ziggurat was never hollow, but its silence holds everything. Now we turn upward once again, but not to the dusty worker's home, nor the quiet shrine. We rise to the high walls and polished columns, to the place where kings dream, where dancers wear gold, and where the night is filled with omens. We rise now, past the winding staircases of the ziggurat, past the smoke of street fires and the shouts of market vendors, and into the elevated hush of power. Welcome to the palace of Nebuchadnezzar II, the most powerful king Babylon ever knew, and the man whose name, even millennia later, still shimmers with a certain weight, less biting. Here, the heat feels different. The air is perfumed with crushed myrrh and cedar oil, wafting gently from censers near the hallways. The walls, glazed in deep lapis blue, are alive with depictions of lions, bulls, and dragons. You walk softly across tiles polished smooth with use. Servants pass without sound. You notice them only when they pause to refill a lamp or adjust a curtain to shift the slant of golden light, of whispers exchanged behind gilded doors. This is not the Babylon of dust and labor. It is the Babylon of ceremony, of performance. Nebuchadnezzar's palace stretched over vast acres, its boundaries lost in gardens and gates, in private halls and administrative courts. He ruled in the 6th century BCE, when Babylon was at its height, a marvel of its world. Even Herodotus, writing later, called it a city unequaled in all the lands. And yet, within these walls, there was tension beneath the calm, always, because to be at the top was to be constantly watched. Imagine the king seated beneath a frieze of golden lions, receiving envoys, scribes, generals. He listens quietly, his hands still, adorned with simple rings, a show of controlled restraint. But beyond that stillness is a web of calculation. His father had built Babylon's foundations. Nebuchadnezzar expanded them with ambition and, at times, cruelty. His empire stretched from the Persian Gulf to the edge of Egypt, and every day he was reminded, power is borrowed. Even kings answer to gods, especially in Babylon, so he built. He rebuilt temples, raised city walls, restored shrines. He poured wealth into the Ishtar Gate, a marvel of engineering and art. He commissioned the Hanging Gardens, though whether they truly existed, or whether they were a memory of another city entirely, remains a riddle. But in this imagined night, let's say they did exist. Let's say you're standing on a terrace, and in the distance, a man who prays daily, sleeps lightly, and dreams of eternity. You hear water trickling from an artificial stream, carried up by some clever device, a hidden chain of buckets, perhaps, to irrigate the garden suspended above. Palm trees sway gently beside pomegranate shrubs. Vines coil over stone columns. The stars glimmer above the scent of jasmine and river reeds. And in the middle of it all, inside the palace, life follows its own quiet rhythm. Servants wake early to prepare ceremonial robes. Musicians rehearse in shadowed alcoves. Astrologers interpret dreams and watch the heavens, because no decision is made without a sign, no declaration without consulting the stars. In one hall, a feast is being prepared, dates stuffed with walnuts, fish cooked in wine and coriander, barley cakes with honey and fig. The king may eat only a few bites, but the performance of the meal, that is what matters. Nearby, his wives live in their own quiet wings. Some are political marriages, others personal choices. Their influence is subtle, exerted through gifts, conversations, sometimes dreams. Guards patrol the gates, but not with haste. The threat to a king does not always come with a blade. Sometimes it comes as a rumor, or a prophecy, or a dream too vivid to ignore. And so the palace breathes, not with ease, but with vigilance wrapped in luxury. This was not just a home. It was a stage, a sanctum, a mirror to the gods' imagined splendor. And yet, all of it, every wall, every script, every terrace, would one day fall. They're here again. The palace did not last. The walls were broken. The gardens, if they ever lived, turned to dust. The tiles crumbled, and the lions faded to silence. And so may you. But tonight, in your mind's eye, alive in soft color and warm stone, alive in the rhythm of power and performance, the palace sleeps. Now, let us drift away from Babylon altogether, but not without remembering. In a moment, we'll bring this journey to a quiet close. And now, we leave Babylon. We leave the scent of clay and crushed grain, the ringing footsteps on sun-baked courtyards, and the murmured prayers to gods whose names few remember. We leave the workers with their jugs and ledgers, the kings with their towering walls and weary dreams, the ziggurats, the stelae, the gardens that may have bloomed once, high above the rooftops. We let them all rest, because history is not a story that demands resolution. It is a rhythm, a slow tide that carries lives toward silence, and yet it leaves traces, scratches in clay, a seal lost beneath the floor, a name repeated in the dark. Tonight you walked the streets of ancient Babylon. You felt the dust between your toes and the weight of the sun on your shoulders. You listened to the scribe's silence, the priest's incantation, the king's stillness. You saw justice etched into stone, and mystery buried beneath it. And you stood where gods were called down into statues, where feasts echoed through tiled chambers, and where the stars were watched like clocks made of fire. Now let it all drift into quiet. Let the gates close behind you softly. Let the blue glazed lions fade into sleep. Let the Euphrates flow on, as it always did, as it always will. There is no need to remember everything, just the feeling of time, of breath, of something older than worry and slower than thought. You are here now, in your own time, in your own room. Safe, still, quiet. The past is at rest, and so are you. Good night, and thank you for listening.